appreciate the fact that you are taking your valuable time to participate in civic affairs here in the great city of Somerville. My name is Brad Rawson. I serve the city of Somerville as Director of Transportation. I'm here on behalf of Mayor Curtatone. I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for your involvement. I'd like to recognize a couple of our great elected officials who are in the House with us tonight. Again, many places that you folks could be. Ward 1 Councilor Matt McLaughlin. Thanks, Matt. And State Representative Mike Connolly is here. Thanks, Mike. So folks, I'm a Somerville resident. I know many of you from a variety of public engagement work that we've been doing in the 11 years that I've been serving this great city. Folks who know me know that I'm a Somerville resident. I'm a Somerville parent. My 3.5-year-old is going to start his public education in the great public schools of Somerville over on the west side of town a year and a half from now. So it's fun to kind of be here in the east. And one of the things I always like to say, we were here for Resistat last night. Folks like me who are public servants, who work in transportation planning, often sit around wishing that their communities were asking for the same things that we view as important and imperative in our judgment, our professional judgment. We often sit around wondering and wishing that we had elected officials who shared our values, who shared our work ethic, our commitment to transparency and progressivism. The city of Somerville is blessed with its city council, with its state delegation, and of course, Mayor Joe. This guy is the best in the business, folks. It is a pleasure to work for him, and he asked me to be here tonight. He's hoping to be here. He's got several other meetings to be at as well. So what is our objective? Our objective is to make sure that our stakeholders are still aware that the McGrath Boulevard process is still underway. We have had a long 10-plus year effort working in partnership with the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. They've been great partners on these issues. But ultimately, it's the city of Somerville who is really pushing, who is asking, who is working in partnership with the state to make sure that we transform this antiquated state-owned roadway into something that better serves our community. So this is a city-hosted meeting. A couple of our great staff partners from DOT are here. I'd like to acknowledge Michael Trepanier, who has been just a champion and wonderful project manager on a couple different chapters of the McGrath project, and Frank Szynski, the amazing district highway engineer from District 4. Frank, what are you guys responsible for? Like 40 different municipalities in eastern Massachusetts. We appreciate your emphasis and partnership on a variety of Somerville issues these days. 62. So, can I get a quick show of hands? So, these meetings tend to work well when they're informal. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who among you live east of the highway in East Somerville? Awesome, awesome. Who among you live, say, between McGrath and Walnut Street, kind of the Winter Hill neighborhoods? Awesome. Anybody live way up in Ten Hills? Anybody live way down in Union? Anybody live like me, kind of the points west, Spring Hill, Davis Square? I'm over by North Street in far western Somerville. Okay, that's a good representation. It's always helpful for us to kind of take the temperature. We do a lot of work to make sure the folks who are most affected by local policy decisions and infrastructure investment are here in the room working in partnership with our teams. So I'm delighted to see that many of you here are East Somerville residents as well. Last quick show of hands. Was anybody in the room last night? Chris, I thought I saw you. Yes. Phil? So we were here for Resistat last night talking about a variety of civics issues. Resistat is always intended to be kind of a magazine version of all the dynamic issues happening in Somerville. This is intended to be a little bit more of the book version, kind of the longer form. So the agenda for this evening is just to kind of remind us collectively of why we are planning to transition the highway. This is not a new idea. I'm one of the veterans in our office. And again, I've been part of this community for 11 plus years, and it's always funny to me when I talk with people, and I work 2 or 3 nights a week doing community meetings like this. I work 2 weekends a month engaging with folks to try to make sure people are plugged in to civics issues. When somebody says, this feels like a newfangled idea, this feels like some flavor of the month novelty, it's always fun for me to point back to all the great work that this community has done. So the Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan was a community-based strategic plan that the city of Somerville worked through a 3-plus year process Lots of grassroots involvement, lots of professional process, and it dealt with everything from public education to environment to economic development, workforce development, and infrastructure planning. And it called explicitly for the removal of the viaduct and a McGrath Blvd kind of solution that worked better for the neighborhoods. So again, we didn't invent these ideas. These are the channeling of our residents' desires. We did an equivalent process for the Union Square and Boynton Yards neighborhoods a couple of years ago. That process culminated and was published in 2015. Sometimes folks in my line of work forget that just because we are aware of a policy plan, do our average residents, do our average business owners or nonprofit organizations kind of place the same emphasis on this stuff? So this is a commercial. Go check out the Somerville by Design process for Union Square. It calls explicitly for transitioning these legacy roadways that I would argue, and you have told us, are doing more harm than good to our community. Let's transition it to something that does more good than harm for our local residents, for our local civic life, our environmental health, and our social equity. Has anybody read the city's climate action plan? We just published it a couple months ago. Anybody familiar with it? So, it's amazing sometimes we think, wow, Somerville's on the cutting edge of so many issues, but it was 2018 when we actually finally published our climate action plan. It's called Somerville Climate Forward. It is well worth reading. And as we think about the climate crisis, we have done inventories. We know where our community's greenhouse gas footprint is coming from. And a big part of it is, pitched roof, two-family homes built 100 years ago, woefully insulated, like the one I live in, and probably many of you live in, but 35% of the city's carbon footprint is generated by motor vehicle trips that start or end in Somerville. So, of course, we all spend a lot of time talking about regional cut-through traffic and how frustrating and frightening it can be for our residents to be dealing with this kind of on and off ramp to Kendall Square, on and off ramp to East Cambridge dynamic that I think has been very challenging for Somerville for a long, long time. But we also need to look in the mirror. We are the pollution, we are the congestion that we want to try to rectify. 200,000 tons per year, metric ton equivalent of carbon, are emitted by my motor vehicle trips, by yours, by your neighbors. We can't blame our residents and our workers for driving if we don't provide them with safe, inviting, and appropriate biking and walking infrastructure. We can't blame our residents for calling an Uber if the congestion that plagues our city's streets results in MBTA buses that are on time only 60% of the time. The city of Somerville has the power to fix this mobility dilemma. And the cool thing is that our climate process, our climate plan, which had a great deal of public involvement, really identifies the transportation sector as a relatively easy place for us to start moving the needle. And again, it's not just about controlling the suburban commuters. It's about making the right decision, the easy decision for our residents and for our businesses. We have also made an equally ambitious commitment to safe streets. We have joined a group of about 30 municipalities around the country. This is actually a global movement as well, that says, gone are the days where we should take for granted that human beings die on our streets. We know the tools to keep people safe as they walk, as they hop on the bus, as they bike, as they cross the street from shop to shop. It's about controlling speeds. And the city of Somerville has been working through a process, again, classic Somerville version, community process, technical expertise, to produce a strategic plan to guide our investments, to guide our policy work for the next 10 plus years. And so, again, if you're interested in the safe streets crisis, I would argue, Google Vision Zero. You'll find a rich literature of national, international, and local examples, and we've got a great task force of volunteers who've been working with us on these issues. Again, Matt and his colleagues on the City Council have just been great, asking us, what resources do we need? How do we get the regulatory environment, the built environment, to actually cause, safer behaviors? As I mentioned earlier, McGrath Highway is under state jurisdiction, but it is clearly one of the premier risk factors for safety in our community. Next quick show of hands. Who has ever used the Gilman Street underpass to connect Central Hill, Winter Hill, over to East Somerville, right? I mean, if you know about it, it's the obvious choice if you're on foot or on a bicycle. And a few years ago, it wasn't the case. We worked with MassDOT. We worked with Michael and with Frank and their teams to fix up that bridge, to improve the lighting, improve the drainage, rebuild the sidewalks. And then we started doing the signage and the education to make sure that folks who have a kid here in this great public school but live across the highway, that they know that they don't have to literally take their lives in their hands to cross up at Medford and Highland. They don't have to go out of their ways and have that multiple-leg, undignified crossing at Washington Street. They don't have to play Frogger and breathe in toxic fumes at the corner of Broadway and McGrath. We've created this lower stress access point. And yet, when you actually look top to bottom of McGrath, there are 10 intersections. Each of them deserve a version of that kind of retrofit to make it safer, more efficient, more predictable. So it's a big objective as a project as we kind of get into the details here. Again, we're always interested in credit where credit is due. Our community, our elected officials have been advocating to transition McGrath. Back in about 2012, 2014 era, the Commonwealth recognized that its bridges were in a deplorable condition, were presenting a safety hazard, and they started working on a strategic plan to ultimately decommission the elevated freeway. They finished that work and published a plan called Grounding McGrath, which evaluated a series of alternatives. Again, great community process, great technical process, and DOT said the Boulevard solution is the best solution based on what we are hearing from our stakeholders. This was just kind of a preliminary planning study and an alternatives analysis. And again, my peers around the country, they shake their fists at their state DOT, departments of transportation. They say, why won't they listen to our constituents and transition these legacy suburban freeways into more urban conditions? MassDOT is working with us every day on these processes, and I give them credit for it. More recently, Michael and his team were able to push this project development process forward, and we had a dozen-odd meetings in this building with, again, good representation from residents, the nonprofit community, elected officials, state agency types, private sector as well, and again, advanced that design work, did all the technical traffic modeling to really understand, what are the details? How do you make it work? It's easier said than done. So if you're interested in that, McGrath Boulevard is the project name. And last but not least, in terms of why we are planning for this, again, who rides the 89 and the 101 among you? I ride the 89 once in a while, not the 101 so much. These buses are stuck in traffic, not because the MBTA doesn't have enough drivers or buses. They're stuck in traffic because cities like Somerville have not made courageous decisions to give them their own right-of-way. Because cities like Somerville, until recently, have not understood that they can't just point their fingers at the transit authority. They have to get involved and partner with them. And so we're in that process right now. Folks who raised their hands when I asked about living in Union Square know down on Prospect Street, the city of Somerville implemented a priority bus lane. We had surplus asphalt that was under our control, and we did a little demonstration project, demarcated and barricaded it off to say, you know what, if you're riding the CT2, you should have the privilege of jumping those long queues for northbound Prospect Street into Union. Let's privilege the transit rider rather than treating them as a second-class mobility stakeholder. So it's cool that this aircraft carrier is turning. This region is getting it together. I credit the secretary and the DOT team. I credit the general manager and the MBTA team because not only are they offering us solutions, but they're challenging us to do our part. Folks who live in the Winter Hill neighborhood know that the city of Somerville is getting ready to implement a priority bus lane project on Broadway that's going to go from about Main Street at the top of the hill to about McGrath Highway and really organize that Wild West 90-foot multi-lane, poorly defined roadway and provide that, roll out the red carpet, dedicated lane for 89 and 101. And when we did this stuff in Union Square, we get real-time run data from the T. They've got GPS units on all their buses, and we found that we were saving several minutes per trip. We can achieve the same for 89 and 101 customers, and that means literally thousands of hours of person delay are alleviated because we've been courageous enough to say, you know what, we feel like we've kind of got some extra roadway capacity here. So the Better Bus Project has been kind of a call to action for municipalities, not just Somerville, but I'm proud that our mayor has asked us to be on the cutting edge and to work in partnership with the regional authority to get these issues scaled up quickly. There is a congestion crisis. We've all read in the Globe, Metro Boston is one of the most congested regions in the country. You can't build more highways. It doesn't work. It's been disproven and debunked. The only way out of this paper bag is to make short trips, 2 miles and less, easier to get around on buses, on feet, on bicycles. So what do we do with this information? The reason that the mayor asked us to host this meeting to get you and all your social and professional networks plugged in is that we have had a good coalition to preserve construction funding for, ultimately, the removal of that overpass and the transition to the Boulevard. It's a long way out. I don't want to frighten anybody. The bulldozers are not coming tomorrow. This is still 8 years out, but MassDOT plans in these kind of decades-long increments. There is currently roughly $80 million of federal funding that has been identified and that has gone through a competitive screening process by our partners at MassDOT, at the Federal Highway Administration, and the organization that manages this process is called Metropolitan Planning Organization. MPO is the acronym. The MPO, under federal and state law, is obligated to administer these federal highway funds. They have a scoring process, they have public comment processes, and McGrath Highway was the highest scored project the last time they did their 4-year plan. They're now about to release their new 4-year plan for public comment. We want all of you to be aware of that and to, again, applaud them for their work and work with us to protect that construction funding, which becomes available in 2026. And the construction cycle, again, would be kind of 3 hard years, 26 to about 2030. So that process is underway right now. If you want to get more information, you can Google MPO LRTP, the Long Range Transportation Plan. We're not too worried about losing this construction funding. Again, it's gone through the screening process. It's been scored highly. We believe that the region and the state agencies believe in it. But still, it is worth checking this out. So much of our work is not accessible or obvious to regular folks, to regular stakeholders, and a big part of our work is trying to pull back that curtain and make sure people understand how these decisions get made, how our tax dollars get allocated. So the LRTP, the Long Range Transportation Plan, will be released for public comment next week, and we anticipate a favorable vote, a 30-day comment period. Again, the mayor, our state delegation, our federal delegation have been great on all these issues, and so we just want to get through this hurdle and pivot into the next phase of project development and design. So let me scroll back ever so quickly, and then I'll kind of open it up for kind of discussion. This is not intended to be a long meeting, believe it or not. Has this happened before? Yes. There is a national and international movement to eliminate these relics of 1950s and 1960s traffic engineering that, again, cut off communities from one another, that actually impair local economic development, serving these historical 1950s central business districts like downtown Boston at the expense of vibrant local business districts like East Somerville and like Union Square. So one of the cool things is that, again, Maureen is here from Michael's team. They worked on this process down near Franklin Park at the KC Arborway in Jamaica Plain. This project was just completed, right, Michael? I mean, you guys are done. Yeah, does anybody ever ride the Orange Line all the way down to Forest Hills or have family or friends down in that portion of the city? There used to be a hulking, intimidating, high-speed, elevated overpass that, again, cut off Jamaica Plain from portions of Hyde Park and the Forest Hills bus depot and Orange Line station. And DOT exhibited a great degree of courage, a great degree of patience, diplomacy to ultimately study and implement a very, very progressive solution, ultimately demolishing this freeway and creating a more humane and livable boulevard in its place. So if you find yourself going to Franklin Park Zoo, like I said earlier, I've got a 3.5-year-old and I have a zoo membership and I love to get down there as well. But go down to Jamaica Pond, go down to Franklin Park, and when you're on Route 203, the KC Arborway, think about what it would have been like to be blazing through that neighborhood at 60 miles an hour, really kind of offending local residents, and then just getting stuck in the next traffic light anyway, right? It's an illusion of mobility to be having these free flow conditions, and it comes at the expense disproportionately of urban communities, communities of color, environmental justice populations. So credit to DOT for working through this process, and we've got the same professionals who managed the Casey and have applied all the lessons learned for planning and for construction in Somerville. For anybody who says, Brad, you're crazy, you're going to create more congestion than you've solved, I hear you. Traffic's bad, and we can talk about that in a moment. But I guess the last thing I'd like to kind of say for these introductory remarks is that I was at a community meeting just a few weeks ago, and I provided a couple of slides. It's easy sometimes for us to forget how far Somerville has come in 10 or 15 short years. We didn't used to have raised table pedestrian priority crossings like this one near Porter Square at Davis Square just a decade or 15 years ago. So folks over on the west side may not know that this used to be a pretty high-speed, uncontrolled intersection over near Davis Square. Union Square. Folks who've just arrived in this community over the last 5 years may not know it, but Bow Street, it still has a long way to go, but my goodness, it was a horror show back in 2007, and Mayor Joe led a process to get a new bike lane established, to create net new parking spaces for small business vitality and traffic calming with the reverse-in angled parking on Bow, and to just kind of take this super wide 30-foot expansive asphalt, which sends all sorts of psychological signals to drivers that this is a place for speeding, not a place for walking, and we started to transition Bow Street into a better, local business and human-scaled street. East Broadway, here we are. This is our showcase piece because it's not just paint, it's not just flex posts. I was in a different role 8 years ago when we were working with Frank's team at MassDOT District 4 to ultimately build a $10 million road diet solution on East Broadway. And people in community meetings like this, we're shaking their fists at us and saying, traffic apocalypse is going to come. Why in the world would you reprioritize publicly owned land, which is currently a travel lane, and give it to a 15-foot wide sidewalk instead of a 5-foot wide sidewalk? I think that East Broadway is just a remarkable success story. Merchants have expanded their operations. The mom and pops are making more money. Community pride, local art, cultural storytelling have all flourished in the last couple of years since we built sidewalks that invite people to actually linger, to actually patronize businesses, rather than just get through that space as fast as possible. That's the signal that the built environment was sending to you as recently as 7 or 8 years ago. And again, at risk of beating a dead horse, over just the last couple of years, we took another one of these Logan Airport-style roadways over on the west side near Tufts University. We build out a big curb bump out, install a new bike facility, on-demand, mid-block crossing to keep pedestrians safe. And wonder of wonders, we do the pre and post studies. Motor vehicles are moving more slowly. Often a narrower travel lane is at least as effective as a speed bump. So that's always one of the things that we want to communicate to our stakeholders. So I guess just kind of in closing for these opening remarks, we can't take this stuff for granted, folks. We are living with a legacy of failing sewers, of crumbling city-owned buildings, of roadways that are designed to move suburban commuters at the expense of people who live in urban communities. And we have really moved the needle here in Somerville because you as stakeholders have asked us to, because again, as I said, we have a great city council, great state delegates, great state agency partnerships, but you can't take this stuff for granted. Ultimately, this is happening around the country and around the world, but it requires sustained focus, generations worth of activism, playing small ball, keeping your eye on each individual step of a process so you can mobilize $80 million of construction funding. But if you are successful, then you shrink down the concrete and the asphalt and you create better green infrastructure, you create better placemaking, and studies have shown that small businesses generally are making more money in these types of complete streets projects. So with that, let me just again leave this commercial with you. Google the MPO. Google the long-range transportation plan. Reach out to your elected officials at our city council, at our state delegation, the governor's office, the mayor's office, and make sure that folks know that we haven't forgotten as a community. Just because we have been understandably focused on saving the Green Line doesn't mean that we've forgotten about McGrath Highway, McGrath Boulevard. I always say at these meetings that it wasn't a foregone conclusion that the Green Line would be saved. I believe that Governor Baker and Secretary Pollack were serious when they said, we want the Green Line, but not at any cost. And they had to do extreme cost-cutting measures. And frankly, we're still super disappointed with some of the details of those cost-cutting measures. But what was the alternative? To file a lawsuit against the state? lose another 10 years. Thank goodness we are building the Green Line. So our focus was right over the last couple of years. We've saved it, we've saved the community path, and we're still working to kind of modify some small details. However, now it's on to the next big legacy item, and that's McGrath Boulevard. So that's my introductory spiel. Thank you for your patience, and I do want to just kind of open things up for open discussion, question and answer. Matt, Mike, please, if you want to say any words, I would certainly welcome that. But this is intended now to function as kind of open Q&A and discussion. So thank you.
I think you deserve it.
Most communities wish they had what we have here in Somerville, so again, credit to all of us. Please.
So this is 8 years down the line?
Correct. 8 years down the line.
How vulnerable is it to be scrapped?
So I'll repeat, forgive me, I'll repeat questions because our microphone is misbehaving, and Bill is kindly shooting this for City Cable, where you can watch it on the city's YouTube channel later. So the question was, how vulnerable is the $80 million that's kind of held in escrow for that 2026 to 2030 period? Based on what I've been seeing, and the City of Somerville has a seat at that Metropolitan Planning Organization, not representing just our parochial interests, but representing 20 inner core municipalities: Everett, Revere, Medford, Cambridge, Boston, Chelsea, et cetera, et cetera. So far, all the signs are good. Knock on wood. Again, because the MPO has a good process where Metro West suburban communities, North Shore communities, South Shore communities all come around the table and recognize, hey, there's hundreds of millions of dollars being allocated and programmed, and there is an element of regional equity, but this project has scored highly. People have continued to believe in it, but I don't take things for granted, and neither does Mayor Joe, and until that plan gets renewed and approved, then I don't think we can rest on our laurels. Please.
You talked earlier about having priority for buses, and I know, and I'm sure you know, that the one thing that really affects usage of buses is frequency. There's a very distinct tipping point that people use buses if they come at least every 15 minutes, and if they come less than every 15 minutes, people will not use buses or get in their cars or catch an Uber instead. So is there any progress on improving bus frequency?
Yeah, so true. So the question was about bus service, the realities that we all know as riders and observers, that if it's not coming at essentially 15-minute increments, you can't plan your life around it. The story I always tell is, I live way on the west side near North Street, and work at City Hall, obviously, on Highland Ave. If I'm riding the bus home, which I do, a few times a month, I've got a choice, 88 or 90. Route 88 runs on roughly 20-minute frequencies. Route 90 runs on roughly 45-minute frequencies. Nobody plans their schedule around Route 90. 45 minutes is unacceptable. And the T gets that. They've been working through this process. Again, if you're interested in transit equity and kind of the next generation of improvements in MBTA bus service, get involved in the Better Bus process. There are a series of short-term wins that they have articulated, one of which is actually about Route 90, which serves this neighborhood and runs on Cross Street and runs on Broadway. And, Route 90 is the funniest thing. It goes, as folks may know, from Highland up Cross Street and down East Broadway, and then it hits not one Orange Line station at Sullivan, 2 Orange Line stations at Assembly, but 3 Orange Line stations at Wellington. And for us, that just seems like a super inefficient use of limited MBTA resources. So we had used the Better Bus process to advocate with the T to actually experiment with Route 90. And to their credit, they've heard us, and they have eliminated the Wellington connection. They're continuing to serve Sullivan and Assembly. But what that means is that there's going to be essentially like the equivalent of an extra 10 or 15 buses per day on Route 90. So better frequency on these trunk lines of Highland Ave, Cross Street, and East Broadway. So we're psyched about that. The next step is kind of more of a whole cloth remaking of the bus network. There are, 150 bus routes on the MBTA system, and many of them date back literally 75 or 80 years and don't really reflect the demographic, the economic changes that we've seen as a region. And the MBTA is facilitating a series of very adult conversations about whether we continue to, preserve all of those routes in their current form. City of Somerville has been invited to serve on a task force, and again, we'll be having community meetings on this subject. In my vision, McGrath Highway has the potential to serve as a kind of a bus highway There's just so much right-of-way there that we've always talked about green infrastructure, protected bike facilities, all that sort of stuff. But you could grab a lane of travel and almost do like what the Silver Line does over in Chelsea, have a dedicated right-of-way, almost a Latin American or European style center mounting of the platforms, pay before you get on the bus, and have high-speed connections, perhaps from Wellington or Assembly down to Lechmere and East Cambridge. So I think the region is turning the corner and not focusing so much on these mega projects of subways, which just, again, take 20, 30 years, and thinking about the early wins of optimizing bus service. And the T has been good about listening to folks. They've been doing street team stuff. They've been flyering. We've been out at bus stops talking with average riders. Joe, the mayor, has been out there talking with folks because we just recognize this as the quickest, easiest way to move more of our residents if we can modify these bus routes. So I hope that rambling answer starts to get to some of your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Ellen, please.
I was just going to recommend that people do go to the website for the MPO or the longer transportation thing and write a very brief email and say, we want this to be done. We did this and we want it. And while it may be that this year it's not, the funding money is not specific, but another project will come up and we need to be vigilant. So, only takes a few minutes. They do look at responses.
Very true. Yeah, again, for the benefit of anybody in the back or for City Cable, Ellen just, want to reinforce that message that we should all be paying attention to these issues, advocating for what we think is the best use of public resources at the regional and state level. Stephen, please.
I'm just going to stand up. So I just want to thank you for turning out and everyone else. I was just looking back through my emails and I found one from November 8, 2010, where I was emailing with some folks at this organization called Livable Streets, which I was just getting introduced to. And it was about how we can get rid of the McGrath Highway. So that was 9 years ago, and so this is 8 years away, and that means we're more than halfway already there, minus. But I also know that 7 years ago, in May 2012, after we were basically being forced to repair the overpass as it is now, we had a really great community meeting. More than 200 people showed up, and out of that actually came a TV documentary that won in 2013 about the removal of the McGrath Highway and the advocacy behind that. But one of the things that came out of that was these service changes, which you've seen on the ground, the McGrath, the bike lanes, and the closing of that second ramp, and the closing of the tunnel, and some of the work that's happened at Washington Street and things. So we sort of, even though we weren't actually taking down the highways, we sort of used this process to make incremental changes. And I know that next month I think we're going to get a pop-up protect the bike lane further down the McGrath Horizon, sort of near using the science, right? That's part of that process. And then we also have the study that's going on at Broadway and McGrath that MassDOT is doing for pedestrian access. So I would love to see, we have eight more years of experimentation time and study to do. So I would love to see, that dedicated bus lane on McGrath, next year or something like that. Just to try it out with homes or something like that. And really just use that space to think about how we can re-envision how we can these communities together.
It's a great point, Stephen. Thank you. And again, in terms of that early action type of work, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that, again, the city of Somerville is partnering with DOT to work on urgent safety issues focused on the crazy spaghetti bowl of ramps and tunnels where I-93 meets State Route 38, Mystic Avenue, and McGrath Highway, kind of Fells Way West, up near Assembly, near Foss Park, near the Ten Hills neighborhood. Can I have another quick show of hands just to try to keep people engaged in a long meeting? Who has ever witnessed or heard about residents of the Winter Hill neighborhood, the Mystic Avenue neighborhood, climbing through a hole in the fence to access the only full-service grocery store in their neighborhood, making a crossing from the middle of Foss Park over to East Somerville? I mean, folks, this is crazy. There is no pedestrian signal. There is no legal crossing for that neighborhood. And every time the DCR, another state agency that we partner with, patches up this fence, because, how can you, put people in harm's way and say, yeah, this is illegal to cross if you got, 60-mile-an-hour vehicles slingshotting off the Wellington Bridge and the tunnel sections there. It's not a fair or appropriate thing. So they patch the thing up, and people get the bolt cutters, and they cut the holes because they need to get groceries each week, right? Good news, we're working with the DOT and the DCR on earlier phase safety improvements in that neighborhood. And I think 2021 is roughly the timeline that the funding, it's like about $5 million, right, Frank? So we have a community process, technical engineering work that just started, and hopefully that will be ready for construction just a couple of years from now, as opposed to, 7, 8, 9 years from now. So that will focus on kind of the northern edge of McGrath. There's a possibility of integrating the crazy intersection of Broadway and McGrath into that process, but the real emphasis is those crazy high-speed ramps coming on and off of McGrath and I-93. That is, statistically one of the more dangerous locations, no matter how you're getting around. Driver, person on foot, person on bike, in all of Somerville. Karen, you've been waiting, please.
Actually, this is sort of a good follow-up question. I was wondering about some early work that can be done before 2026. I mean, if the funding isn't going to be available till then, does that mean detailed engineering designs? Does that mean, sort of like a new road network kind of situation, and they put it around there? Like, what other kind of work can happen before 2026?
Yeah, good question, Karen. Oh my gosh, I've messed up again. Michael, can I put you on the spot to describe how the process works?
So there is work that can be done in advance of 2026. For right now, I think where we're at, where the department's at, is there's a lot going on. Does this work? Right. Oh, okay, got it. Okay. So there's a lot that can be done, that we have started doing, and you've been part of that process. I've stood out at ArcBeat with you many times, and I think what we're doing here tonight is trying to continue to keep that process going in a way that the community doesn't forget, that we recognize, we publicly recognize our partnership, but frankly, we got to a point in our process where we had ultimately demonstrated the feasibility of the Boulevard solution, which during the grounding McGrath planning study had been really limited to just looking at the feasibility of transitioning the corridor. We did have to do, as you probably recall, a great deal of analysis for the larger network and what that means. So in terms of what we're still doing, we're not really advancing the design. We're not working on engineering drawings because the timeline is so far away. If we were to continue to advance that process today, by the time we were ready for the funding that may come into fruition in 2026 from the MPO, those designs would become stale. So really, that's something that we want to start looking at maybe 3 years in advance, maybe 4. Those are some sort of higher level policy decisions that I don't make. But we are continuing to monitor what's happening out on the corridor. So back in 2011, and then again in 2014, we collected traffic counts. And then the grounding McGrath study used the 2011 counts. 2014, in the Boulevard project development, we were using those counts. We've recently collected additional traffic counts back in December of 2018 to just keep our thumb on that pulse and to ensure that the trends that we've been seeing over time continue, because frankly in other parts of the state they haven't. So I just have to pause and acknowledge Mayor Joe's entrance into the room. It's always a bit nerve-wracking when he walks in. Such a towering character for us here. So welcome, Mayor.
And Michael, if I can chime on to that to answer Karen's question about that design development process.
Sure. I was being long-winded. Thank you, Brad.
No, one of the things that we observe is that the state of the art in the complete streets movement and advocacy is changing so rapidly right now that the bus solutions, the pedestrian safety solutions, the bicycle mobility solutions, that are viewed as the best in class today were not even on collective radars 3 years ago. And so, to the question about bus mobility that came up earlier, 4 or 5 years ago when we were in rooms like this, working with folks like you to talk about what kind of modes might be prioritized on a future McGrath highway, this renaissance of bus mobility had not yet begun. The MBTA had not yet extended the Silver Line service from the airport over to Chelsea. The casino wasn't even in a permitting process. So much has changed, and now for all these different reasons, the region is focusing on bus mobility. And if we were to take a design that we had pinned down a year or two ago, it's entirely possible that that design would be incompatible with really high-quality bus mobility in the McGrath corridor. And so to Michael's point, we will continue to work with our partners at DOT to make sure that we've got the freshest, most progressive designs based on community process, and then can quickly pivot from that design finalization to construction bidding and implementation.
And if I could just offer an example of that, I've been at DOT for about 12 years, and this is Brad's meeting, and I don't mean to do this, but I'm going to do it. I did work on the Casey Arborway project. Maureen Schlebeck is here from our traffic team there. We learned a lot there, and if you look at the design of Casey, we essentially just turned it north-south for the McGrath Boulevard project, which was responsive to the current state of the practice in 2014-15. I look to, if any of you have been up to North Station recently, which I expect many of you have, you can see the Connect Historic Boston project, and the separated bike lane in the median on Causeway Street. It's an excellent facility. Today, by today's standards, it's pretty darn good. My first meeting that I ever attended was in the garden, where we were doing a public presentation on a design that was hashed out in 2008 and was being presented in 10 or 12. And it was bike lanes in an area where you have extensive loading and unloading and passengers getting off of shuttle buses and things like that, which, I sat in the audience that day and was like, this is kind of not good enough. And here we are today with a constructed separated bike lane running down the median in a bidirectional fashion. That's a world-class facility today. That's the facilities we designed in our concept for the Boulevard. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to agree with ourselves in 2026. So yeah, there is some hedging that we're doing by saying, yes, the concept is feasible. Removing the highway overpass and putting that traffic at grade with signals is feasible. But what we're here tonight to really remind everybody is it is a long game. And we are playing the small ball this is in the city's hands to advocate for this to continue. MassDOT does not advocate for projects. We maintain infrastructure and manage our assets. So the case of the bridge, we had to maintain it back in 2011. Today, we're looking at what that long-term vision is.
And just to jump on that point, and then we'll take the next question. One of the reasons that the McGrath Boulevard project has scored very highly, consistently, in this highly competitive MPO process is because over the life cycle of a 100-year investment in infrastructure, it will cost the Commonwealth less money to maintain an at-grade boulevard than an elevated structure. 5 years ago, folks at the state level were, considering a $20–25 million reinvestment, and ultimately we worked together to downscale that to more like a $10 million investment just to buy another couple of market cycles.
Plus the $3 million in interim at-grade improvements.
Yep. Thank you, Michael. Good point.
Yeah.
So, again, system longevity, safety, environmental equity, these are all the reasons that DOT is kind of turning the battleship, and I give them credit for it. This is not happening in every state in America.
That's for sure.
Chris, I feel like I'm restating the last couple of questions, but if it's too early to design, that's fine, but why are we having a meeting tonight? What productive things can we do in the next few years to work towards the realization of that?
Yeah, no, great question, Chris, and I'll just repeat it for Bill and City Cable. So, why have we called our residents together on a lovely spring night when we could all be doing many other things? Well, it's, to the question that was raised a moment ago, protecting that funding, making sure that in this competitive state environment, that stakeholders know that the Somerville community remains focused on these issues. Mayor Joe?
Yeah, the 2026, good evening, by the way, I'm sorry I was late, is not that far away. Sure. It's far enough away that after all this great infrastructure is built, we can take 2 or 3 years off and breathe deep if we start the next massive project. But if our lessons, what we have learned over the years to advocate for Somerville Avenue, Beacon Street, for the Green Line, if we're not doing the advocacy now, and the only reason we got this approved concept is because the community came out and drove several years ago to fight for the de-elevation for the right reasons. And believe me, there is a line out the door to compete for federal dollars and transportation money in general in these projects. And yeah, MassDOT won't advocate for it, notwithstanding your great work. And they love nothing more to shift dollars somewhere else. So it's a long-term play, but it's not that far off. It's going to take next 2 to 3 years, all these infrastructure projects will be completing. We're going to be finalizing the design the next few years after that, then making sure we execute on 2026. So we need to be engaged now moving forward in the next several years. There's just a lot of lessons we learn how these projects slip. They get pushed off. Some other advocacy group comes up or a state agency says they want this other great highway project and they want to push these other important projects away from my community. That could happen. So we're not going to let it happen, but that's why we're here tonight. If it answers that.
Please, Scott. So if we have to wait 4 years to do anything with this, why can't we start the project sooner?
So the question was, why can't we start the project sooner? So I don't intend this comment to sound flip, but there's a lot of construction going on right now in Somerville, and we're really maxing out our collective public safety and stakeholder resources. And so even if $80 million were available and this project were fully financed and constructible today, I think it would start to really overload the system to be doing that work over the next couple of years. So the timing is really not bad. Frankly, our organization is learning a lot, and I know it's painful for East Somerville residents right now. The last couple of days have been particularly challenging here along Cross Street, Tough Street, and Pearl Street. But the mayor has asked us to treat these bridge closures like the 2015 snow apocalypse. This ongoing public safety emergency. We got the war room type of environment. I'm on the phone at 7 a.m. with a police sergeant and a police lieutenant talking about deployments, talking about signage changes and such. So we're learning a great deal about how to manage big, heavy construction. And, folks, it's only going to get more intense with the Green Line over the next year or two. The eyes on the prize is that we're going to have light rail service and a full community path in mid-2021, and thank goodness for that. If there is an opportunity for the city of Somerville with our partners at DOT to actually have this project kind of bid ready and shovel ready in, say, 2024 versus 2026, then I would suggest that maybe that's a middle ground, Sky, that we can work towards. And it gets, Chris, to your point about making sure that the design process is fully advanced, and if this crowd in Washington, gets an infrastructure package going, for example, the way that we did after the recession in 2009, and all of a sudden there's a big opening of the valve of federal transportation dollars. Of course we want to be competitive. Mayor always asks us to say, what's our project pipeline looking like for those big ticket items that we can't self-finance? So, I hear what you're saying, and if there are ways for us to work with our partners at DOT to crystallize designs to get to these various milestones of project development, environmental review, there is a federal and state environmental process that has to go on that is part of the workflow for next steps. So I think that those are maybe tangible things that we can work with DOT to advance in the meantime so that we don't lose the opportunity for a 2024 miracle.
Please.
I have a question. I know that it's going to be a few moments before design development happens with design. In terms of design team and design team selection, I just wondered, has anybody been selected? What firms are you considering? That sort of information.
So the question was about the professional teams, the staff at DOT. So let me be clear, and then I'll ask Michael to chime in here. So the project is managed by MassDOT. They have consultants on board. Again, as we said earlier, the same team that successfully, transformed the KC Arborway and Jamaica Plain and Hyde Park Forest Hills. So McMahon Associates, Maureen is here representing them. She and her colleagues have been fantastic. You've had a couple other firms on the job as well, Michael, right?
Yeah. So at MassDOT, we have a great deal of contracting mechanisms. So we do have a number of firms that have been previously direct selected through a number of our contracting instruments. So while we're not really spending a great deal of time and money on the design right now. We do have an assignment with McMahon Associates, with Howard Stein Hudson. Jeff Dietrich is in the audience keeping some notes for our long-term record. The sort of project filing cabinet, if you will, is live in person with us, as his boss likes to call him. So, you know, that's an ongoing effort. You know, we were really hot in 2014 when we kicked off at the Argenziano School. And really the intent, like I said earlier, the intent of that piece for those 2 years was to further demonstrate the engineering feasibility of the overpass removal beyond the Route 28 corridor. We did that. And now, to just reiterate what Brad and the mayor have said, this is a moment in time where the long-range plan is being updated, and regardless of who we have on board for designing, we're not going to be able to continue to do that, certainly not at the staff level, if we don't have the support of the MPO. In that right now this update is happening. It doesn't really matter who we have on board. MassDOT has all kinds of abilities to do this when the priorities are set by our regional partners. That's why this evening is why we're all here, why Brad and the mayor convened you here tonight. But we've also, to kind of continue on that point, we've been very dynamic in understanding who should be the right lead on our team at the right time. The exercise we went through from 2014 to 2016 was very much an exercise in demonstrating the feasibility of managing the traffic flow through the network while leveraging all those multimodal aspects of the Boulevard design. As we get closer to 2026 and we start planning, as this money is preserved in that long-range plan, and we continue to have these as statewide priorities, we'll bring in other experts. We'll bring in landscape architects. We'll bring in urban planners who were originally on the team at the very inception. We recognize that our teams have to be, I mean, certainly I do, our teams have to be very multidisciplinary, and not just in the way that you have a structural engineer, a traffic engineer, an engineer's engineer, and an engineering engineer. We've gotten beyond that at MassDOT and recognize that need to hear many more voices to really better knit the urban fabric, if you will.
I'd like to chime in on that briefly. So again, DOT has done excellent work listening to our community and trying to harness what they're hearing. And so, you know, up on the screen here, you see a couple of the, you know, photo renderings that the interdisciplinary engineering team that Michael mentioned produced back in that last kind of iteration. So, you know, here's the Washington Street intersection. Here's JJ's over on this one corner, looking towards Union Square. The old Boys and Girls Club in the background. You know, Valvoline, AutoZone, looking south towards Cambridge. And so they produce a concept. They kind of vet it and validate it, as Michael said, from a system traffic standpoint. They try to honor what they're hearing from the community about the desire for better green space, better buffering from the highway. But, you know, if you actually start to get into the weeds and look at the great Union Square neighborhood plan that our staff produced based on 4 years of community process, there were slight variations in the concept design. And so here you see, you know, one engineering firm that reported to the city of Somerville produced for the public conversation. And then an alternative that is not exactly what DOT's engineering team produced. And that's okay. It's healthy to have a little bit of this kind of competition of ideas, this exploration of alternatives. So, you know, the bike facility, the buffering of a frontage road, kind of like you have on Medford Street today with the Portuguese Club, you know, is shown in both directions in this scenario. So that's not exactly what DOT's team produced. The city of Somerville can and will continue to work on these types of explorations. We don't have the deep pockets of the MPO, as Michael described, but we do still have great staff and on-call consultants that can kind of vet these ideas out and then feed them to our partners at DOT to make sure that the ideas do not go stale and that we're really keeping up with that evolution in bus mobility, bike mobility, pedestrian safety, et cetera. John, please.
I was wondering why, if the traffic is such a big problem in the city and congestion, is such a problem with all the traffic that's going on, we all know how bad it is. Why did we close the ramp down off of McGrath Highway that leads down to Target?
Yeah, so the question was back in 2014, 2015, why was the decision made at the city's request with DOT's partnership to close the state ramp down from southbound McGrath down to Somerville Ave, Medford Street? And the answer is that, again, our stakeholders were asking for it, that our residents were interested in challenging the status quo, in having this kind of short-term improvements for pedestrian mobility, connecting folks who live on the brick bottom side of McGrath Highway more effectively over to the Union Square neighborhoods, in improving safety of the frontage road and the down ramp itself, that we had a history of crashes that were documented, and that was a relatively low-cost experiment that was planned and implemented. And so, again, just like any change to the status quo, I respect the fact that there are different opinions and folks may continue to disagree that was the right decision at the time, but it was the opinion that we were hearing from the majority of our stakeholders, and the city of Somerville requested that DOT did it. To their credit, they have implemented that, and now we've been managing and measuring the efficacy of that. Is it all perfect? No. Is it a short-term play and a short-term investment? But I would argue that the improvements of pedestrian and bicycle mobility at Washington and at Somerville Avenue have been worth the trade-offs. But again, you all live and do business in the neighborhood, so we want to respect the fact that you have different lived experiences than I do up the hill at City Hall or at home on the west side of Somerville. And we truly are trying to listen and be iterative to that process.
Do you have metrics on how things changed before and after that?
So the question was, do you have kind of management metrics? Yes. The short answer is yes, Chris. We don't have them at this, at this presentation, but yeah, we're building a library of traffic counts. Michael, if you want to chime in, you guys have collected the most recent stuff, right?
Sure. So back in 2016, we were challenged with that question, and we did a great deal of data mining and analysis with some vendors that gave us access to mobile data and connected vehicle data, trucks that are tracked with GPS and whatnot. It's called streetlight data. Since then, it's been a bit, there's some controversy in our corner of the world and folks who are in the industry about the reliability. At the time, we felt it was fairly reliable, and we were ground truthing it with MBTA travel time data. We did find there were some things that occurred as a result of the closure of the Somerville Ave down ramp. But in MassDOT's opinion, both then and still now, those impacts to travel operations, say on Medford Street, are greatly outweighed by the safety benefits, most notably at Medford Street at Somerville Ave, under the overpass, the closure of the tunnel, the introduction of the pedestrian crossing at Linwood, the elimination of the down ramp weave. So folks, there was a really heavy desire to go up Somerville Ave or down the Medford Street extension. We eliminated all of that by closing the Somerville Ave down ramp and really reorganized the things that were happening down there. So just give me 1 second. So I think we don't have, because of the way that our safety data is collected, it's literally crash reports that are collected over the course of 4 or 5 years at a time. But that's something that we need to continue to evaluate. So since the improvements were implemented somewhere around 2015-16, when everything was finally done and we did our ribbon cutting, Mayor, maybe you remember better than I do, but I don't remember what day it was. I just remember it was a really sunny day in October. But we need to continue to look back at that and continue to evaluate if those benefits are staying true, and if the travel patterns that we're experiencing as a result of that closure are holding to the things that we predicted when we first planned that closure.
So do you still feel as though it's the same? Do you still feel as though it's a help? Because there have never been any pedestrians walking down that ramp. But you went from 5 lanes to 2 lanes, and now what you have is a bike lane that takes up one of the 2 lanes. So I sit there every day for 46 years, and I watch people get hit on their bicycles. I've seen 3 accidents in the past 4 years or so that are pretty bad, right at the traffic light where the bike lane on a highway is intersecting with where the cars come off. You've only got one solid lane and maybe 1.5 if they're not in the bike lane, but 90% of the people who drive down that road are in the bike lane.
So the question was about the bike treatments, on the frontage road on Medford
Well, I
Street.
just don't see any pedestrians walking on that ramp ever. And I think the traffic pattern coming down in front of the Brazilian Club and JJ's, that's just a congested mess. And now with Washington Street being closed, the bridge, which I understand this is all necessary, and it's a good thing for the city. I just don't understand why we took that away so soon. 5 years ago, we shut that ramp down. That's a long time. And then they rebuilt it. They went underneath the tunnel. They spent, I don't know how much money, millions, all the lights, all the beams, everything's been redone. Brand new. I watched it all happen. And it's never been used. I don't understand.
And to go back to John's question about you're going to go back and revisit the economic impact as well? Can you revisit the people, the lack of customers and people coming in traffic down that ramp that used to come down there? How many people still go to John's Auto Sales? How many people still go to Burger King? What good's Target there with that big parking lot, no traffic coming down there? Go along Somerville Ave, behind the police station. There was a sub shop there for 100 years, closed down. Why? No traffic. Is there any sympathy for the people who built Somerville before these politicians were around, before anything was around, and just displaced all their drive traffic, took their livelihood away? I mean, you're going to go back and revisit that? You just spent $21 million to do that thing over 5 years ago. $21 million. You closed the ramp down, then a bunch of bums moved underneath the bridge. I wrote the article, I know, I saw them all. There's no traffic there. How are these businesses supposed to survive? Was that the plan, to get rid of the businesses, to discourage the business there? But you answered that for me.
The short answer, so folks, I trust, heard the questions, and the short answer is no. The city's objective is always to make sure that business vitality is part of the planning process and is one of the many key criteria that we use for any infrastructure or policy changes. This community is working to honor its history and to preserve what makes Somerville, Somerville, and at the same time be very clear-eyed about all of the social, economic, technological changes that are facing our communities. We can't put our heads in the sand, but neither can we ignore the folks, like you said, who have built this community.
And I'm all for the community. I think you're doing a great job, but there's certain things that you've done wrong. Somebody should own up to it and admit it, and if you're 6 years away from taking that highway down, fix it. You should open it and use it.
No, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
The Mercedes dealership is there. You've got the lights. Do you think anybody walks through there? No.
So one of the next things that's going to be happening, and one of the things that we have been working on that I didn't mention in my opening remarks, is fixing sewers. And again, this is the unglamorous stuff. But something like 2/3 of Somerville's sanitary sewerage flows through that intersection of Somerville Avenue, Medford Street, and McGrath Highway. Something like 2/3 of the raindrops that hit Somerville ultimately flow through big pipes. So the big crazy excavation that's happening in the heart of Union Square right now is the first stage of a 3-year, $60 million construction project that is intended to alleviate historical flooding in the community, that is intended to actually reduce backups into people's homes and basements, that's intended to make sure that our toilets can flush, and that new development can come here and actually have infrastructure that works. So that process is going on right now. There's a big MWRA pipe, like a 6 or 8 foot sewer that's 20 feet down, out in front of the auto glass shop, in front of the corner there that you're describing, that drains most of East Cambridge and most of the city of Somerville. And the contractor, Barletta, that's up in Union Square right now doing the big excavation by the Reliable Market, will be marching down towards that intersection of Somerville Ave, and they will be having an equally impactful excavation site as they tie in some of these 140-year-old sewers underneath Somerville Avenue to the big MWRA pipes that go ultimately in Brick Bottom and out to the Old Millers River by Prison Point and the Museum of Science. So, we are in the midst of, a once in 100 years infrastructure renewal.
And we realize that you're doing this, so you have to do the sewer system, but you're making it 10 times worse by not letting people go by, so traffic gets congested, you have arguments at the traffic light, people get angry, because those Barletta trucks have been around my place for 5 years. I serve them all coffee. They come in and out, use my bathroom, and I don't mind. I don't mind. I'm about to retire anyways, but it doesn't make any common sense why you would allow all this construction to go on and then stop the traffic flow. So you have one lane coming down on one side of McGrath Highway. And it's a highway. It's called a highway, it's a highway. And you get your bikes, you pedaling down the street. You gotta feel bad for them, but the cars driving the bike lane, because there's only one lane.
That's actually how it's intended to operate.
I'm sorry, I just need to address a couple things. So first of all, to your first point, and I've read your articles, and I want to just say very definitively, the state had no intentions of closing businesses or having that whether real or perceived negative impact on the vitality of those local businesses. And
Fix it?
You know, that's certainly something we can discuss.
I
do not. We have implemented those changes and have no plan to reverse them. But there was never an intent to negatively impact those businesses, and whether or not that was the result of the closure of the Somerville Ave down ramp, I won't accept that was just that.
Okay, so
anecdotally.
it wasn't done intentionally, but now that it's happened, isn't there a fix after 5 years?
Well, like I said, the intention was to improve safety. We need to go back and evaluate that.
I've been there for 50 years. I've never seen anyone get killed on that street. 50 years. 50 years businesses on that street.
Understood.
All of a sudden you're going to close the off-ramp of the tunnel now.
Understood.
50 years.
But just to address the question you very pointedly asked, we did not intend to result in the forced closure of businesses.
But inadvertently, we all make mistakes, so isn't there a fix?
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's correct.
But it's happened.
And I'm hearing you.
And Mike, you know, the business vitality question is something that the city of Somerville has staff, technically trained staff, people who are out in the community each day, working with merchants, with mom and pops on East Broadway, and we can talk with our counterpart, Tom, who's great, runs a great team, and see if there are mechanisms that can support.
I've talked everywhere. I've never seen anyone come in any of the businesses from Somerville Avenue, McGrath Highway, or William Street. I'm there every day. Not one person come explain, how are you doing here without any customers? I haven't had one person come and say that.
The only person that has any heart at all is Barletta. They come over, they apologize. John, do you mind if we use the bathroom? No, I don't mind at all. Go ahead. Do you mind if I make coffee? No, help yourself. Have coffee. Yeah, well, do what you gotta do. The faster I keep them happy, the faster they're gonna be away from my shop. But they've gone around it 3 times in 5 years, and they keep coming back, which I know you have to do what you have to do. We have to make the city a better place, and I'm all for it. I think that a lot of what you're doing is great. I don't have any problems with it. I just think that we all need to be smart. And if you do have somebody working for the city that's going to come out and ask us how we're doing, I've never met them.
I've never seen a state representative or an alderman come in, neither the prior alderman, come in and ask you, how's everything going? Not one. Not one state representative ever came in.
So,
Not one alderman meeting.
so this has been helpful. We will talk with our economic development team. We will try to follow up with you. But out of respect for everybody else's time, this is becoming a pretty one-directional conversation. So I'd actually like to move on and acknowledge a couple other points from folks who have been waiting. Please.
Oh, thanks. I'll be quick. So first off, I want to give a big round of applause to everyone in Somerville who participated in the the Massachusetts Mass Commute Bike Challenge. Somerville won first place across the whole Commonwealth in terms of bike miles biked for commutes last week. So. I think this is great. I think the protected bike lanes throughout the whole route are going to be great and big improvement. My only, I guess, more of a comment than a question is make sure where it ends by the Twin Plaza that we get the right connections to the community path and to the Grand Junction path. That I think these are going to be huge corridors for bike commuters in all different directions, and making sure we safely tie together those corridors is going to be very important as part of the final design towards the southern end.
Thanks, Ted. Appreciate that. Please,
Couple other
you in front.
things along final design, just as this is moving forward. One would just be, you're talking about a major roadway, whatever title we want to give it, being right alongside a huge section of our artist community. So I think if we're not involving Brick Bottom, I don't know where Art Farm is, but I mean, like not locationally, but in its lifespan, Art Farm, if we're not involving those people in this process, I think we're missing a huge opportunity for the kind of what a good meat section kind of livelihood of our community. The other piece I would just throw in, along with, we talk a lot about pedestrian traffic, and I think we are, as a city, doing a lot more to help all of that. I think a lot of times we're forgetting that pedestrian traffic is not just the average person walking to the grocery store. Pedestrian traffic is, and I think Cobble Hill is a big area of that, people who have some mobility issues. Pedestrian traffic in our city is a huge number of people with strollers. And right now, the light timing, if you were walking down Washington Street, right now you kind of can't because the bridge is closed, but if you were gonna walk to Union Square from East Somerville, the light timing in that rotary area, it is humanly impossible to cross fully under McGrath Highway in one light cycle. You have to get to the middle and then wait for the whole light cycle and get to the other side. Not looking to change that tomorrow by any means, but I think as you work towards creating a plan that works, I think you just need to kind of keep in mind that not everyone is in a position as they use that area. And if you want to bring customers, Target's a great example. Target's a phenomenal place for people to go purchase things if you need stuff, and it's right there. But if people have to take, 10 minutes to cross the street, a little less interested in not getting in my car.
Yeah, great point. Last night I had about a 30-minute conversation with a resident after getting out of a community meeting who talked about how, he's trying to commute from East Somerville down to Cambridge, and, riding a bike doesn't work for him. So, what are his options, right? So I hear you loud and clear. And when we plan for the most vulnerable, slow speed pedestrians, people with mobility impairments, seniors, parents pushing strollers, people carrying heavy groceries, that's generally where we get our best results because that serves everybody well. Honestly, a lot of this is just about the, the kind of the width from building face to building face across the highway. The average human moves at about 3 feet per second when you're walking. So if you're trying to cross 100 feet, then you're going to need, 30 plus seconds for an able-bodied person to make that crossing. So as a result, with all these crazy ramps, they have these multiple stage crossings and people get stranded, whether it's up at Foss Park and Stop and Shop, whether it's at Washington Street or at Scary Way and crossing over to Target. So working to, kind of really knit the neighborhoods back together from a, human scale and a pedestrian standpoint really is one of the primary design objectives here. So definitely hear what you're saying. And in terms of the involvement of the Brick Bottom community, whether it's folks who work on that side or whether it's folks who live over there, we do have community meetings. We've had good participation. One of our task force members was a delegate of the Condo Association. We've been down in there taking, some applause and some pointed criticism from folks in that community as well. So again, we're really trying to have a transparent and inclusive process, even when people have different opinions or different standpoints. Please go ahead.
Just seeing as happens and McGrath gets granted, in the state management, I'm asking because we had a problem last summer where we reported a sidewalk hazard to the city hall. They were like, we can't do anything, it's a state highway, you have to get into the state. So is that going to continue to be an issue?
Yeah, so the question, I'll just repeat it, was, when the city of Somerville doesn't have jurisdiction over a roadway in this case, what's kind of the maintenance issues? What are the, the safety issues? Folks who may be parents who live on Prospect Hill and want to walk their kid over here to the east or over to the Capuano Early Childhood Education Center know that the crossing guards at McGrath are not City of Somerville crossing guards. They're actually DCR employees under state jurisdiction on state payrolls. So it is a good and relevant question. With DOT, Frank is here representing District 4, and when we have problems with traffic signal timing, with a variety of clean and safe type issues, we call Frank and his colleagues, and they're amazingly responsive. And again, not every community has that access or has that partnership. So I definitely want to give credit to DOT, but also acknowledge the fact that whether it's the Kensington Underpass and cleaning things up there, Matt and Mike have been working on these issues with us. Frank and his team have a larger area of responsibility than we do. So if there are ways for the city to collaborate and have local forces, whether it's on the law enforcement side, whether it's on the DPW, the trash and refuse side, those are conversations we can have, but the default is that it would remain in state jurisdiction, and then we would want to make sure that we're having those life cycle cost conversations with our partners at DOT and not just build something that we can't collectively maintain. So, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I realize that that's in some ways a non-answer, but I want to kind of honor and acknowledge that is an issue that we try to work through. Same thing happens with our local parks. Think about Lincoln Park. Think about Chucky Harris down on Cross Street East. City of Somerville builds amazing parks, but it's one thing to build and to mobilize $1 million worth of capital. It's another to have that kind of tender, loving care to take care of the facility. We have good, hardworking DPW staff, but they can't be everywhere. They've got 60 or 70 facilities that they're responsible for. The same dilemma, is present with DOT managing all of their assets around Eastern Massachusetts. So we'll definitely, file that away. Jeff's taking notes, and we can talk about that. Okay. Thank you. Please, sir, you've been waiting.
Yeah, since we're talking about life cycles, can you help me understand the new philosophy with the life cycles? It's something that I've noticed over the last maybe year or two or so, is that when the light for pedestrian right away is synchronized probably 3 seconds ahead of the right turn on any given corner, which is making it, as a pedestrian, very challenging to make it through the street, and B, as a driver, very challenging to run over someone who's actually technically has a right of way, who is now almost competing with, do I have the turn on the green or not? And more often than not, depending on the time of the day, I will be losing the lights being stuck in the middle of the turn.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Why that is and why, it's spreading throughout the whole state. I've seen it in Boston, Cambridge, Somerville.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'll repeat it briefly. So there is a kind of new standard that is being, kind of scaled up in terms of traffic signal timing patterns. The old school was, an all pedestrian phase, all motor vehicle travel stops, and then you have pedestrian travel that is granted in every direction. This is going to be a tough little example here. I've got the wrong photo. So here's Franklin Street coming out of East Somerville, and here's Broadway looking towards McGrath and looking towards Foss Park. So if this was a four-way intersection, you would essentially have, all motor vehicle traffic frozen and then all pedestrians able to go. This new standard that you're describing, sir, the technical name is concurrent phasing, and that means that pedestrians can move in the same direction as motor vehicle travel. So in this case, you would say, all right, pedestrians are going to get this head start to leave Franklin Street and cross over here to Mudflat, and then there's going to be that 3 or 5 or 7 second head start. So then motor vehicles get the green in the same direction, and they're going to be expected to yield to pedestrians in a crosswalk. City of Cambridge uses this as their default. Boston uses it their default. But then there are other kind of areas where the intersections are too complex or complicated for that kind of simple solution. City of Somerville has started working with this, and here's the reason. In order to have a dedicated vehicular phase and then a dedicated pedestrian phase, what you end up doing is getting like literally a 3-minute around the horn cycle. Imagine Broadway at McGrath, where you've got 6 lanes of travel to cross, and you've got heavy movements in all directions. It means that a pedestrian is going to have to wait 2, 3, 4 minutes in some cases, and then research has shown that pedestrians start crossing against the signal. Lots of research about this, and then safety challenges develop. People sometimes use the term jaywalking. I try to avoid using it. It was, invented by, the folks back in the 1940s and 1950s to kind of criminalize walking in some ways, to discourage people and tell them, you stay on the sidewalk, don't get in the street is for cars, pedestrians to stay the heck out of it. But people do it. People are great triangulators. They're going to find the path of least resistance. They're going to look for an opening in traffic, and they're going to dart across, and that creates safety challenges, documented pedestrian crashes. So the industry as a whole has moved in this direction of when certain circumstances are met, they recommend these concurrent phases. So we've dipped our toe in the water in Somerville, but this has been much more common, as you said, in Cambridge and in Boston. The only example in this part of the neighborhood that uses it is Broadway at Lombardy. And that's more of a kind of almost like a 3-way intersection like Franklin and Broadway. So we had worked through that process and implemented it, and it helped reduce some of the congestion that folks on Mount Vernon Street and on Broadway were complaining about by shortening the cycle. If you can get like a 90-second, minute and a half around the horn for everybody to use versus that 3.5 minute cycle, vehicular congestion decreases, pedestrian compliance increases, and safety increases as well. But we get that it's a learning curve, and frankly, we have to actually roll out education materials. When we did this in Davis Square last year, we had a bunch of sawhorses at every crossing. We had posters. We had ambassadors on the street talking with motorists, talking with pedestrians, saying, hang on, wait for you to get to the signal, and then know that you've got this protected head start, like a 5-second head start, to establish yourself in the crosswalk. But it is a complicated science, and I hear what you're saying, that there's a learning curve and some discomfort as Somerville, Cambridge, and Boston start to use this more commonly. I guess the last thing I'll say on this, and Stephen, you're active in this world, feel free to chime in, Ted. Advocacy organizations like Walk Boston, which are pedestrian-focused advocacy organizations, suggest that this is the best practice and the best way to keep people safe and keep people moving under the right circumstances. So we always want to collect the data, we want to ask people about their experiences, and we want to actually have the PSAs and the education material so people know what they're getting into and don't get caught by surprise. I hope that it starts to answer your question, even though, again, it can be uncomfortable, and I acknowledge that 100%. Please, you've been waiting, sorry.
No, that's okay. This is really simple. What is the timeline for sending comments to the MPO?
It's going to. So the question was sending comments to the MPO to protect that funding. So next week they will probably take a vote to send the plan out for public comment, and that will start. I think it's a 30-day comment period. Yeah, usually 1 month, right, Michael? So folks will have essentially the entire month of June to send their little emails in, and there's a nice easy interface on the MPO website. And again, just simple stuff. Hey, I live in Somerville, appreciate this, or I live in Somerville and I disagree with this. You have a right to speak to your agencies and tell them how you feel. Thank you.
Will the city send something out letting us know that vote has taken place and comments are open?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. We can totally use our ResiStat newsletter, which goes out every Friday afternoon. We can work through Matt and through his newsletter process, through Mike and his colleagues at the state delegation, so that they can amplify that. Community-based organizations like East Somerville Main Streets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let me do a quick time check. We didn't intend this to be a 9 o'clock meeting or an 8:30 meeting. You've all been very tolerant and putting up with, kind of an open conversation here. We will stick around. I will stick around and have as many conversations as folks want to have. But, you have our blessing to self-select and go catch the last of the daylight or move on with your evenings. But again, we don't want to short-circuit anything. Joe, did you want to say anything? I'm sorry, you were just going to raise your hand.
I'm just going to say thank you for coming out tonight. You just get to the mic down here. How are you? As we mentioned last night, ResiStat and other community meetings, the city has long-term vision goals based on our values, how we want to evolve, how we want to grow, our sustainability goals, our quality of life goals, our public health goals, our mobility goals. And if we increase capacity for more traffic and bring cars in the city, that's not going to help local businesses. It's going to hurt them. All the data shows the more expanded your bike and walking infrastructure is, the better on your local economy, the greater, more positive impact on your local economy. And we're not going to plan a city for cars. We're planning a city for people. We're trying to embrace the tenets of human scale, walkability, bikeability. The car will have a role here. I mean, who is driving, if anyone's driving an automobile, the future we'll soon find out. That's evolving and changing. But if you expand highway access, you build more off and on ramps, you widen streets, that's what you're going to get. And that's not what we're going to do. And our intent is to increase and more, expand our local economy, our small businesses, achieve our public health goals, our sustainability goals, and our quality of life goals. So I appreciate you being out here tonight. I know it's hard to imagine, well, it's several years off, but your input and advocacy now goes a long way. These projects mature over time. They have to stay on schedule. And if there's a chance to move it up a couple of years, we will, but making sure it stays on the tip is the most important thing we need to do. Thank you for coming out.
Yep, sure did. Yep. And anybody who wants to follow up with the city, transportation@somervillema.gov is the best way to reach several of our staff. You can always email mayor@somervillema.gov as well and get Joe himself. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being involved in this great city. Appreciate it.